In today's lesson, we're going to look at having fun with particles in After Effects, making things like snow, like smoke, things like that. So we've got a few different videos we're going to use, a couple of them. There's this one here of up in a space station, and this other video kind of showing landscape disappearing as we recede from the Earth. And a sandwich, which we'll have flying around. And you can see here we've already got some particles going. But what we want to do is make a new composition. And we're going to call this smoke. It's got the pixel size we want. And here it is. So I'm going to start with perhaps this video. Just take a little chunk of it and drop that onto the timeline. And again, remember, this is the area where you layer the clips themselves. This is the timeline that you work on. This is where you look at the video. And this is your bin where all of your clips are. Here's the effect controls. I'll go back into the project. Now we want to cut a little bit of that video off, so we'll just, with our pointer tool, we'll just move a little bit in, perhaps to about there, and then we'll just move this along. So we have a little bit of flight above there, and we're going to make the sandwich fly across and then put a smoke trail on it. And right now our video is 20 seconds long. So what we need to do first is get the sandwich. You put the sandwich there above the landscape, so you can see that's on top. And the first thing we need to do is just get rid of the blue background. So again, we go into keying, color range, drop it on there. So the screen comes up, and we're going to take the plus dropper, the one that just gets rid of everything. And that way we don't really have to mess around with tweaking it. And then we're going to make a little flight path, just a simple flight path across here. And I actually want to scale this down a little bit so it fits the screen. Make it maybe a little bit bigger so there's a longer flight path. Okay, so now I want to make a flight path across here. I've got to make this smaller. So I'll just click on it, and it's quite easy just to scale things. You can just take one corner of it, and then we're going to move it to the beginning here. I want it to fly right across there, and I'll have it spin around. So in here, we need to go into transform, and on these I want to click them so that they get keyframes in them. It'll be position, scale, rotation, and opacity. And once you click on these little toggles, then the keyframes will show up. And then all I need to do is drag this along, perhaps make an 11-second video. And then I can just drag this across. And you can see it kind of makes a timeline across. So you can see that when you play it. Now it has some inherent music, so I want to get rid of it, so I just click on the little speaker there. Now, After Effects is constantly rendering, and you'll know something is rendered if it has this little green bar here. So sometimes the first time you play it through, it'll be a little bit rough. And then after that, the second time around, it'll be much quicker. But every time you do something to it, it will need to re-render, and then it'll move faster as you go through it. What I want to do now is just tweak a little bit. Click on the sandwich, and then move it around a little bit, just to create a little bit of curvature in that line. Make a little bit more interesting of a pathway. And then bring it all the way back, and I think it would look better if it spun around a few times, as any sandwich would probably do. So I'll put another keyframe at the beginning because I want the rotation to stay quite still there, and then I'll bring this to the end. In rotation, I just have to drag this little number here. I could type one in, or I could drag it so it's twice around plus 20 degrees. So now when we move backwards, you'll see it spinning around. So what I want to do is make some smoke trailing this. There we go. So I'll close sandwich here. And in order to create an effect, you need to do it on a layer. And you do a new solid. And they're always called dark red solid, but I'm going to call this smoke 1. And you make sure that the color there is black. And you go OK, and it'll just drop it on top of there. And I actually want to put it right under the sandwich because that way it'll look like the smoke is coming out of the sandwich. So what you need to do is go into effects and then simulation, and for smoke the best one to get is particle playground. So you drag that onto here, and I think just for now what we're going to do is we're going to turn off background just for a little bit, just so we can get the effect of the smoke going. So you'll notice that when you move this along, in fact we might even just darken out the sandwich for a little bit, you'll see that there's kind of a fountain spitting out these particles. We'll move this forward a little bit. Up here you've got all of the, in the effect controls, all of the different aspects, the different effects that you can do to control that. So you're going to start with the cannon, and the cannon is actually the thing that emits these particles here. With the cannon, you can change the position of it, you see with this here. And it's important to note that you can change that position, but I'm not going to put in a keyframe yet because I want it to be right there in the middle. And then the first thing you do is you increase the barrel width. And you see the more you increase that, you see it just gets a little bit wider, and those particles kind of drop down. And here you can work with the particles per second, so you can increase that and you get a lot more particles spitting out, but we'll turn that down for now. And then here's a little toggle where you can change the direction of it. At some point you're going to want to work with things like random speed, for example, or the direction random. You want it to spread out a little bit, and the velocity random, so you can spread those out, and the particle radius, make those particles wider, smaller, and the color. And I think for the smoke to begin with, we want just a nice white. So the first thing we want to do is just to get the smoke to go upwards. And to go into gravity, we want to change the direction of the gravity and the force of the gravity. And we want this to go exactly opposite. So we can say about 360 degrees. And then eventually we're going to turn it this way here. And I want it to move it downwards. You can either just drag it like this, or you can move it with these little toggles here. So there's your particle emitters. And we're going to increase that radius a little bit. And you can play with the force of the gravity more or less. And at this point, the gravity is coming from here because we switched the gravity around. So you can knock back the gravity so it moves a little bit slower. But you can also work with the velocity, and that is the speed that the cannon will emit it. But we'll bump the gravity up a little bit. And you want to force the random spread. Not too much, just a tiny little bit. And that way you get a little bit more realistic looking smoke. Okay, and now we have to start actually turning it into smoke. So we go to the blur and sharpen, and you want something called fast box blur. You just drag it onto here, and then right here this little control panel pops up, and you can blur it. So now you can start working on things like velocity, again the random, and if you want the particle radius. And now what I'm going to do is make the screen visible. Okay, and now I'm going to actually bring that forward a bit so we can see the smoke better. And once I get the smoke going the direction that I want it, then I'm going to start randomizing things. Now what we want to do is make the smoke turn sideways like this so it's trailing as the burger goes across. So here you can change a little bit the direction. You move this toggle around. So that way you get the direction, but it's also interesting to play with the direction of the gravity a little bit, and it makes a little bit of curvature in it. So you can see that emitting the smoke there. And if you want to increase the barrel radius, you could do that a little bit. Then what I need to do is bring this back to beginning. And right here, this little icon, that's how you move the smoke around. So what you need to do is, now we're going to make the sandwich visible. You want to have the cursor right at the beginning, and then you drag the smoke right more or less behind the burger or the sandwich there. And then what's really important is that you click on position so it adds a keyframe there. And then you drag the cursor across to the point where the sandwich kind of disappears. And then what you want to do is you want to drag the smoke. So here you have some nice smoke trailing the sandwich. Then if you play that again, it'll go a lot faster now. What we need to do now is to make this smoke look a little bit more realistic, partly through tweaking and partly through layering and coloring. What I want to do next is I want to click on smoke and then do Command C and Command V to make a copy of it. And so the smoke will look just a little bit thicker, but now that you've got a different smoke, what you start to do is you start to play with these parameters a little bit. A few more particles per second. We'll bring this out a little bit so you can see it. Change the velocity slightly, the random spread. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to change it to a little bit of a different color, just so you can see it, the differences there. More of a particle radius, and definitely much more blur radius. And everything randomized just a little bit more. And in fact, I think what I should do is change them to radically different colors. Make one blue and make the other one red. And then you can actually change them back to any color you'd like, or maybe you just like sort of the pink coloring. Oh, maybe the blue smoke is a little bit too random. Cut down the blur a little bit. You can see it a little bit better. So that's the randomizer, the force random spread that changes it the most. And we'll give a little bit more force. So now you could diagnose it a little bit and see that perhaps the blue is spreading a little bit too much, or the red could use a little bit more spread before we change the colors back. And perhaps do a little bit more with the other one. Well, that's probably too much. Maybe 0.01. A little bit wider there, some slightly larger particles. I'm going to change that back to white, and the other one to a little bit of a gray. Now, one thing you could do if you like, you could actually change the background, and you'll see it'll look quite a lot different with a dark background. And on this one, it's where having a little bit of pink smoke might be kind of interesting. And the more transparent and smoky that you want to make it, the more blur that you give it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of these a little bit. Make that one blue again. Do the other one as pink. I think having pink clouds be kind of nice. And one last thing you can do is you go back into transform in these rather than up here. Generally, you don't want to change the position and things in this transform, but the one thing that you can do is your opacity. So click opacity on both of them. And on this particular one, we've got a keyframe right there. And then right around here, we can actually knock the transparency slowly to 0. And in this one, maybe a little bit longer, let it linger. That way the smoke will kind of disappear. Now you can see how it looks with that smoke. And of course you can do a lot more tweaking of this to get look more real. You can actually put different layers and things on it. I'm going to do one other thing is I'm going to change the scale of the sandwich as it flies so it looks like it's moving off into the distance, and then at the same time changing the scale of the smoke as it is emitted. So the first thing that I need to do is work on the scale of the sandwich itself. So I will put one keyframe in here, and as it moves along, I'll shrink the scale quite considerably. And likewise with the smoke, now you can see the smoke is a little bit big there. And we'll have to realign it a little bit with the sandwich itself. I'll do the top smoke first. And you want to work with the barrel radius. Right here we're going to put, actually a little bit back more, I'm going to put a keyframe and shrink the radius of the barrel a little bit. And then also with the position, drag it a little bit closer under there so it appears to come out of the sandwich. And we'll do the same thing with the other one. Bring this back, put a keyframe in there. So I'll drag that down and then shrink the barrel radius. And therefore you'll see it'll kind of shrink along with that. Okay, there we go. One thing that you can do with color is that you can actually change it as the sandwich flies along, and you can have it kind of move through the different colors. So what you need to do is you have to actually put a keyframe there, and then you could change it perhaps to pink. It starts off as white, and then perhaps to kind of purple, and then maybe to green, and then to orange. And likewise with the other one, we can work with a different set of colors. We have to put the keyframe in there. Maybe start with green for that one. So if you want to make something like a really nice rainbow, this is how you could do it. There we go. Now let's watch it go through. So now I'm going to work with another type of particle to make first some sparks and then some snow. So we need to go into project and then composition, new composition. Okay. What I want this time again is I think I'll get this little chunk here. That has a nice dark background, and so I'm going to drop that down into here and start right there. Now again, to make other particle effects, you always need to make a layer, and the layer is actually what contains the effect. So again, you go new solid, we'll call this sparks. And now we go back into effects and presets. You can also go into effects up here. You can go to simulation and then particle world. The one that we did before was particle playground. So we go into particle world. And here you can see it makes this nice kind of fountain of sparks. And that in itself can be used for a number of different things, but and perhaps on your own you could try seeing what you could do with these sparks. So we go back to the beginning. Now we get a number of different kind of little tools to work in here. You have your longevity, so you can make the sparks last longer or less. You can do the birth rate, which you get way more or way less. Go into the grids and guides and pretty well turn those off because you don't actually want your grid on there. It's kind of annoying. So the first thing that you do is you go into the particle, and we want to work with something a little bit different here. There's all these different particles you can work with. For example, a lens convex. You could do faded sphere, and that's what we're going to work with. And for the meanwhile, we'll keep these colors right here. And then you want to go into the physics. We're going to move away from the explosive and go to the directional axis. And what it does is it pushes the sparks into one direction. You see that there. What we're going to do, like I said, is we're going to make sparks. And these are all the different things you can work with, which is the velocity, the inherent velocity, and the gravity. So if you want this to go upwards, you actually kind of work with the gravity so that it points upwards. And then you go to the producer, and you can move this position up and down with that. So we want these sparks to go upwards. Go back to the particle, and we want to work with the birth size and the death size. So I work with 0.02 and even less than that, maybe 0.01, where you can move it up a little bit just to see them as they start. And at this point, they're going just a little bit too fast. So we want to slow that velocity down and bit the gravity. So that will also slow it down. And the resistance. And then you see if you put a lot of resistance, it pushes them down quite a lot. So what you want to do is work with the longevity of them. Okay, then what we do is, and eventually we'll knock down the size of these. You go into the producer and you start working with the different radiuses. And so the first thing you want to do is to really expand this. And that would be your X radius. And they're still shooting up pretty fast. And then to increase the depth of field, you can start working with your Y radius and Z radius. So just for a while, I'm going to turn this screen off so you can actually just see these. And you could include the birth rate, and then perhaps knock the longevity down, the particles. And what you want to do is work with the size variation so that it randomizes a little bit, and then with the extras, the random seed. And then we want to start knocking the velocity down a little bit and knock the gravity down. Because you see at this point the gravity is pulling it upwards. And really randomize them. And then at the same time the hold particle release. So that means that some of them will spark into existence just a little bit more randomly. And then we start knocking down the birth size. Increase a little bit the resistance. A little bit of extra angle. And you could actually try different, for example, types of directional axis. Like the vortex will actually have them spinning around a little bit more, or the twirly. And the twirly is actually quite good for making the sparks look like there's a little bit of wind in there. And that would be fire. Okay. So you can play with all the different velocities, the resistance, and all of those to change the various speeds and things like that. And you can even include some of the radiuses to increase the depth of field or decrease some of them. So now they almost look a little bit like fireflies. And then you can include the birth rate if you like, so you get more of them or less. And also you can knock the longevity back so they don't last quite as long. Okay, there you have some sparks. And now if you like, you can actually put them over top your background. One other thing you can do is up the opacity of them. That will make them a little bit brighter. Now you might even try doing things like stars. That won't look quite so realistic, but perhaps a little bit more magical. And if you go back to line, it's going to be quite a mess, so you don't want that. So you can try all sorts of different shapes to make it come a little bit more alive. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those sparks and turn them into snow, and then I'll just show you other particles that are available that are much easier, but at the same time you can't play with them as much. But in some ways you can do a little bit more. So what I would like to do is I'm going to put in a different image here. It's just kind of a car in the dark, and I want to fit that to the actual screen itself. So I'm just going to resize this, and I can even distort it a little bit. So that would be actually a nice background to make snow. That's kind of a moonlit background. So rather than creating just a new particle emitter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and turn it into snow just by changing some of the parameters. Actually, what I'll do is I will make a copy of this, and then I will close one of them. Okay, so I'm going to open this one, go into Effect Controls, and open up some of these. And the first thing I'm going to do is, in the particles, I'm going to change the colors to white. And I'm going to change the particles again to shaded sphere. So unfortunately, it's really kind of blowing around that smoke, and it's going in the wrong direction. So what I need to do is, and eventually I'll work with the birth rate and the longevity in a little bit, and with the radius, and I'm going to go into the particles, knock the birth size a little bit down, and then what I want is the producer. So I'm going to minimize a little bit the radiuses again. And I need to change the location of this. I'm going to put it up top, work with the gravity. So I'm going to reverse the gravity, and then you'll see that the particles move downwards, although they're and knock the gravity down a little bit, knock the velocity down a little bit, and increase the resistance. Now you can see that the snow is falling still much faster than you want. So what you need to do to really slow the snow down is with the resistance. And you can put that up to, I think it goes up to about a maximum 50. That'll make some nice slow snow. I think 50 would be good. And then you need to increase the longevity, the number of seconds each one will fall for, and then maybe knock the birth rate down a little bit. And you could play a little bit with the direction if you want it to feel like there is some kind of, knock the gravity down a little bit also. Like the more gravity you have, the faster it will fall. Okay, that's a little bit too slow. And then again, increase your longevity. And probably because you see some of those snowflakes are just a little bit too big, you can play again then with the producer and knock down some of these radiuses a little bit. And some of the particles a little bit smaller birth size. And you could probably have a little bit less snow than that. So that's some pretty heavy snow. And again, if you want it snow to be not just even less heavy, then you still knock these sizes down a little bit. So that's some pretty good looking snow. So what we're going to do is just close that one for a little bit. With snowfall, you don't really need to put a new layer. You can just highlight the image that you want to put the snowfall on and just drop it onto there. You can see very lightly some snow falling there. So you got to increase the size and the opacity. And you can work with the scene depth on this one. And the variation in size, you really want to change that. You can increase the size still more. And even the number of flakes, you can make more or less. And you can work a little bit with the speed, and then some of the extras, you can do the random seed. And if you want to speed them up a little bit, you can. See, so you have some more interesting variables in here. And then you can work a little bit with the wind and also the variation in the wind. And if you'd like to turn your snow kind of a blood red, you could do that. See, so snow is quite a lot easier. So you could try some of the others also. What you could do is just make a copy of this layer. And with this one, get rid of the effect of snowfall. And then you could just try something like rainfall and see what happens there. Same thing, drops, size, the scene depth. That's pretty heavy rain, maybe a little bit less rain. The opacity, you can make it more or less. With rain, you want a little bit less opacity. Work with the spread, a little bit of wind, the speed. And again, you could make it a different kind of color rain. You might want something like a green rain. But I like the snow that I made using the other types of particles from the particle world a little bit more. It was a little bit less consistent, and you could play with the drop sizes and things like that. So there's lots of other different effects here. You've got hair, you've got drizzle, you have bubbles, caustic, car dance. I don't know what they all do. So you might want to try some of those out.